Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Azren, the language nerd, as always, and welcome to today's podcast episode. So today, or rather last time actually, last time I brought on the Latin and Biblical Hebrew instructor as a guest on the podcast, and we nerded out about language learning. And today I have the Russian, English, Russian, and Spanish instructor at the Calgary Language Nerds, who's on the podcast as well. She also teaches Galician, although we don't have any Galician students, but well, we could teach Galician if you want to learn. You're welcome to reach out. And she's also learning French at the moment. So, Catherine, how's it going?
Oh, good. Oh, good. Very excited about being here.
Yeah, me too. It's gonna be fun. So maybe a good place to start is tell us about how you learned all the languages you speak, and then just generally speaking, how do you approach language learning?
Well, I must say that I started very early because my first language, well, my first foreign language was English. And I know it because basically when my grandmother, who was in her late 50s, no, speaking about language learning and everything, she found out that my mom was going to have me. And she decided to teach herself English so that she can teach me English. And back in the day, it was obviously like 20 something years ago. So she could only do that by books, by writing every single word, phonetic transcription, and everything like that. Like amazing effort. And essentially, she started teaching me both languages at the same time. So it was, for example, learning how to speak Russian, and I was having a lot of exposure to like English as well. And well, so that's where my English comes from. Although I did go to school where I continued studying English formally, and then when I started learning Spanish, it was also pretty much when I was a kid, because our school had Spanish from the first grade as well. But I must say, I started like speaking it only when I started like actually doing my own well my own learning, I guess, because the school was not enough, but I have always been really interested in that. So i wanted to I wanted to listen to music, I wanted to watch more films, I wanted to make friends with Spanish speakers and English speakers and everything like that. So basically it has been a lifelong process ever since.
So you grew up with basically English, Spanish, and Russian.
Yeah,
So Russian because
but
you were in Russia, English because
yeah,
of I guess your mom, and then so
my grandma,
English,
yeah.
but your
Hmm.
grandma. Oh, so your grandma. So your grandma was teaching you some English at home, even at a very, very young age. You did English in school, Russian
Hmm.
because you were in Russia, obviously, Spanish because it's offered in your school, and then I guess, at what age did you start to do your own self-study of Spanish?
I guess when I was about, well, essentially it's also a very coincidental story, so to speak. I got offered my first job as an interpreter when I was 16, right after I finished school. It was in the summer between, so I finished school and I was about to enter the university, and I was thinking about multiple programs, one of which was Spanish translation and interpreting. But I was like not sure about it. I was thinking about doing probably a different thing or something like that. And then during that summer, I got called to substitute a professional interpreter. Like, and I'm just like high school kid. Like, I don't know anything about anything. I just and basically I got called by a friend of a friend of a friend. They needed a person who speaks Spanish urgently, and I did nothing. I was free, and basically in 2 hours, I found myself at the airport meeting a client, and basically being his voice for like a week. It was a contest of floral design, and I had to help facilitate the work between basically a team leader from Catalonia, Spain, and the group was Russian. Did I have any professional qualifications or any sort of knowledge for that? No. I just went and I said, well, yeah, I'm ready. I can do it. And I was, in fact, able to do that. But it was when I realized that obviously my level is not enough to do any sort of like professional learning. So then I started to focus more on it. So basically, and obviously I ended up going to the university on this program. So ever since I was like 16, 17-ish, I took it like seriously. And also that when I started getting jobs as well
Right.
with it.
So I've known you for a few years now. How long has it been? 3 years? Is that right?
3 years, I guess,
Is
something
that
like that.
right? I think so.
Yeah.
Approximately, something like that. Um, at what point, because you're English, Spanish, and Russian, correct me if I'm wrong, you're interchangeably fluent in all three. Like they
Yeah.
basically are like three mother tongues. Is that right?
I perceive it as like I'm multilingual, being it like to me the criteria is that I think in all three of them. When I get startled or when I'm in all any sort of like altered state, when I'm for example scared or emotional or something like that, I can speak any of them. And that's why I don't and I dream in all of them obviously and those kind of things. So and I don't really it doesn't really matter to me which one to speak when it comes to the effort. So something like that.
Cool. So at what point, because you were saying when you were 16, 17, 16 rather, when you did that interpreting job, you realized your Spanish wasn't quote unquote good enough to be able to do that. So what point did you find that your Spanish, how do I ask this? At what point did you find your Spanish was as good as I don't want to say maybe you're Russian or you're English. I don't know. Okay, two-part question maybe. At
Mm-hmm.
16, 17, was your Russian, what was your English level like, first of all? And then second of all, at what point did you find your Spanish and your Russian and your English, all three were, well,
Yeah,
roughly speaking at the same level? At what point did that happen?
it's actually a very good question. I never thought about English this way because I guess I perceive English just as like it has never been a foreign language to me. As silly as it sounds, because of the content exposure, I guess. Because throughout all my life, I always watch content in English. I always have friends who speak English. So I don't really perceive it as a foreign language as much because I've always been naturally exposed to that. But Spanish is the language I actually did learn to the level that I do speak. So I don't know. I don't know how to explain that, but it's like it's a little bit different for me. Like English, even when I was in high school, something like that, I went to Finland for a while to live there. I had friends from there, so I didn't really struggle to speak English, so to speak. It has never been a struggle to me. Unlike Spanish, Spanish I did as I said, I did struggle for a while. But well, and I guess when I finished the university, they all came to the same level. And also when I started traveling here to Spain, and when I decided to live here, I ever since I started living here, I guess that's the exposure factor as well. Because I live here, so there is no way for me not to speak Spanish. Like I can't not do that.
How long have you been there now?
6 years already.
6 years. Okay, yeah, that's quite a while. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's so interesting because so I think I've told you before that I went to a French immersion school growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what it means is you do almost all of your education in French. The only classes that are not in French will be like gym class, so PE class, music, and
Mm-hmm.
English, whatever your English class is. Apart from that, everything else is in French. Even depending on your teacher and depending on your school, even in your classes, it is strongly encouraged, if not mandated, to speak in French with each other in the class. So even though you're all second language learners, you're speaking French, at least to some extent, with each other. Some people are more sneaky about speaking English, they don't speak it, and some are more into the French. So, but generally speaking, there's,
Mm-hmm.
even in the classes when you're doing group work or whatever, there's some level of French being spoken. So, and it's interesting that you didn't grow up in a country that speaks English, and yet you've never felt that English was a foreign language, because I also grew up with French from a very, very young age of 5, and all my schooling is in French. Like literally, you show up in a kindergarten class, and the teacher's just speaking French to you, and you're like, oh, and you're just sort of, that's just life now. And yet, anyone you would ever ask in Canada who went through that program I would assume, would always say French is a foreign language, is a second language. It is definitely not a first language. So I guess how did English end up feeling like a first language for you?
I guess there's some sort of level of an emotional connection And I guess for me in particular, it was kind of the question also of identity, I guess. I mean, it's going to sound a little bit arrogant or something like that, but it is something that I have the culture and I guess the music, the culture, the literature, the videos, everything like that. I felt very identified with English. And I felt
So,
that I
so
can.
sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. So when you
Mhm.
were young, so when you were young, were you were also consuming a lot of content in English when you were growing
Yeah,
up? It wasn't just school and
yeah,
whatever your grandma did with you. It was also part of your day-to-day life. You were consuming a lot of English.
yeah. That was pretty much like it wasn't. It has never felt like a chore, including when my grandma was like doing stuff with me because she did introduce a language in a very natural and kind of very playful way, so to speak. Like, for example, she would play with me in English, but as you would do, like, not because it is in English, but just because we play together. And I just didn't perceive it as we are doing a task, I guess, because like that's where the difference with Spanish came from, for example, because Spanish I did study from a very young age and everything, but it has always felt like a task. Like, okay, well, I'm doing this task, I'm perfectioning whatever, like this is the task that I have to do. But English, it was I come home, I want to watch whatever YouTube. Well, I don't know if there was YouTube back then, but whatever I was watching and doing, I reckon I used to like to go on this website where you could speak to foreigners, for example. I don't know why, but I found it easier to make friends with people from abroad. Just in my own, and I still have friends. For example, I have a friend of mine from New Zealand that I have known for like 15 years or something like that. Because we just met each other online. We have never met each other in person, but we still talk every now and again. And it has never felt like, oh, I'm speaking a foreign language in this scary situation where another person is a native speaker. Oh my God, he's going to judge my grammar, something like that. No, it was like, oh, well, that's my friend. Cool. I guess that was the probably the difference. I think it may be that.
And how's your grandma's English?
It's an interesting point. She has never spoken to anyone, I think, except for me. That's it. She is able to understand everything. She consumes a lot of content. She's able to read perfectly. She's able to pass any sort of. She really likes to go online. No, she has a tablet and everything. Like I'm very proud of her. And she goes online and she finds level tests. She loves it. And she passes level tests all the time. And she can pass, I think she can pass B2, if not C1, with no problem. But yet again, she has never spoken to anyone at all. Like, I mean, she's spoken to me, but for example, now my partner is from the UK. Sometimes we call and I see how my grandma is petrified. Like she knows she can, but she has never done it. So it's a very scary situation for her. She understands everything we say, but I can see how she doesn't want to talk. But one day I think it will change. I hope so, at least in the future. But it's a curious case that like you can know the language technically, but you can't speak the language at all.
Yeah, I can understand that. It makes sense to me. That makes perfect sense to me. I can relate. I can relate to that. Yeah, I
Hmm.
can definitely relate. Oh, very, very cool. Um, I had a great question for you. Now I forgot I forget what it was. Um, ah, well, it's okay. I'm sure it'll come back to me. I had a really good relevant question, but okay. Oh, I remember what it was. I got it now. So, um, when you speak, I'm really curious. So when you speak in English, you have an implacable accent. At least for me, it's implacable. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to say, you're precisely from here. You're precisely from, it's very, like if I had less exposure to hearing people from the UK, I would be like, oh, maybe you're British, but I've heard
No,
but
no
it
at all.
definitely isn't. I do listen to a lot of UK TV and such, and so I'm like, no, definitely not. And like it's just implaceable. So I'm wondering, when you speak in Russian or if you speak in Spanish or Galician, although Galician maybe we can leave aside because you learned it as an adult, but I guess Spanish or let's do Spanish and Russian.
Mhm.
Um, how does your pronunciation come out, I guess?
I have foreign accent in all of them, including my native tongue. That's amazing. That's great. That's
Really?
brilliant. It's horrible. really. But the thing is, okay, foreign. As you say, my English is an unidentifiable foreign accent. So it's no, probably it's not from any of the English speaking countries. So it's some other thing. I have no idea where my accent comes from. I have no idea how I came up with it. It's just I have always spoken like that, and I have no idea where it came from. Basically, it's a secret to the universe. And then my Spanish accent, I did have to craft, and I did. The first thing that we did at the university was absolutely excruciating practice of pronunciation for 2 weeks to eliminate the accent. I don't know to which extent it worked, to be honest, but well, we had little apparatus that we had to record ourselves and listen to ourselves many, many times doing different sort of exercises up until we realized that we do a good job. It was terrible, actually, because listening to yourself in this quantity is no, unpleasant. But well, it worked to some extent. And then obviously I caught the accent from the local area. So my Spanish accent is somewhere in between. It's basically a foreign person who lives in Galicia, but not necessarily a person from Russia in particular. Just a random foreign person that lives in Galicia that has a Galician accent because, well, it's impossible not to. But you can clearly tell I'm a foreigner. But from where? No idea. Then my Galician, funny enough, is the best one because, and it makes no sense because, for example, the Spanish one is like handmade accent, so to speak, and the Galician one I learned by exposure, more so. And people who have seen me speak both, they're like, how do you have this accent in Galician, which is perfect, and this other one in Spanish? How do they know this? How are they not the same? But I don't know. Just happened this way. And then to top it up, right now, after having lived for 6 years in a foreign country, I barely ever speak Russian unless I teach it. So I call my family sometimes, but not really often. And then when I come back, it takes me around at least a week to get rid of very like quirky, weird pronunciation. In a sense that I obviously am good at pronouncing everything, but then random sounds just fall apart. And you can tell, I got this feedback once when I was in a taxi, and the person, and we were talking about our lives as you do and everything like that. And then he went, "Oh, you can clearly tell that you're not from here, are you? Like you can clearly tell you're not from Russia." Like, yeah, I am from. I'm precisely from here. This is my hometown. Like, no, and I
That's
don't know how.
yeah, that's really common though. I have a friend here in Calgary. He's Egyptian, and he's telling me this story where he's been in Calgary now for I don't know exactly how old he is. I'm gonna estimate he's been here for 20 years. I'm gonna estimate. He came here to Canada. I believe as a teenager or an adult. I can't remember exactly, but he's been here a long time. He grew up in Egypt, right? Born there, schooled there, raised, and then he moved here, teenager or adult, and then he's been back, to visit family and so on and so forth. So he really speaks Arabic. It's his mother tongue, and he speaks English very, very well. He's got this slight. It's almost not even an accent. It's almost like his voice is just kind of deep, and you're just not sure if he has an accent or not. Like it's truly he's bilingual between between Arabic, Arabic and English. Okay, and he's telling me the story where he went back to Egypt as an adult, maybe 5 years ago, something like that, 6 years ago, whatever it was, and he's in his hometown, a few blocks from where his parents live, and he's getting a haircut. He's at the barber's, and they're just chit-chatting, and the barber goes, "Oh, my friend, so where are you from?" And he goes, "Oh, what," in Arabic. He goes, "Whoa, what do you mean? What do you mean?" And he goes, "Oh, where are you from? I mean, obviously you speak Arabic. What country are you from?" And he goes, "Egypt." "Oh, what part of Egypt? Where, what do you mean Egypt? Oh, really?" He's like 3 blocks from here. And the barber went, "No, oh, you're so funny. No, seriously, where are you from?" And he goes,
It was pretty much like that in my
he's like,
case.
"No, I literally right, like 3 blocks this way to the right, like to the east. It's like right here. Like this is where I born, raised, grew up, went to school. Like, what do you?" But it's because he's been in Canada for whatever. It's still his first language. It's still his mother tongue. He speaks it just as well, if not better than English. I don't know. And yet,
Yeah.
when he goes
No,
back,
I can relate.
something's changed, right?
No, and also syntax changes a lot. Like English, for example, I find it's a very logical language, as in everything has the word order is very well, it's very certain. So you have a certain way of speaking. And in Russian, for example, it has a free word order. So anytime I come back for some time, I speak like an English person in the sense like I put everything in the same order, and it doesn't flow really well in Russian because Russian plays with the word order in order to create meanings and in order to create some sort of a feeling to the sentence and everything like that. And if you don't know how to do that, even if you speak flawless Russian, you will still be identified as a foreigner. In fact, for example, ChatGPT speaks like that. It doesn't speak Russian very well, in a sense that it speaks perfectly grammatically correct Russian, but it speaks like an English person speaking Russian. And so do I. And it's kind of very upsetting because, well, maybe not anymore because I took a conscious effort this year to make sure that I have more, so to speak, practice or exposure of Russian because I started to realize that sometimes it just doesn't work really well. And I started, for example, to journal every day in Russian and to try to get creative in Russian to write something because the word order is a big issue. So I try to get it back to where it flows well, where it's beautiful, where it's creative and everything like that. This would definitely identify me as a foreigner back at home.
So, well, hang on, I'm actually really curious. So when you were growing up, like when you were like 8, for example, did you have a foreign accent in Russian at that point too?
I have records from when I was a child, and I just speak with some sort of an accent. I have no idea what it was. Just a bizarre one. Just other in Russian. You
Oh,
mean no? In Russian,
interesting.
no. In Russian, in fact, I did have a like. I grew up in St. Petersburg, and our people we are very how to not to offend anyone, but we are very kind of very if you think about like Maggie Smith in English, a little bit like that, a bit not posh necessarily, but kind of like a beautiful pronunciation that everybody wants. Well, Maggie Smith or I
Okay.
don't know, David, uh, David Attenborough. I'm not sure how to pronounce this name at all, but well, here we are. And then I was taught this kind of Russian, and I like before that I had a very like before living abroad, I had a very like I put a lot of effort into speaking like a person from St. Petersburg because everybody would like all of my friends from there. They have a beautiful like proper Russian or something like that. So, but yet again, I thought I would never be able to get rid of that. I would never be able to forget how to do that. And apparently, yes, it is possible to forget how to do that if you speak other languages long enough, basically.
So what about, I'm just so fascinated by this concept. So what about when, like before you moved to Spain, like when you were even like in early 20s or late teens, whatever, like your friends, like were you, for example, were would your friends like kind of tease you sometimes about how you spoke, or was there anything that would happen as a teenager or maybe early adult that you would speak in Russian and people maybe comment you're not from Russia or things like that? Or is that something that happened more after you left and then it really got accentuated?
I think it was I think it was when I left more so, but people definitely knew me as the language one. As in, for example, how did I get a job as a professional interpreter, which paid money and which had great expectations and everything like that? Was because I was famous for apparently being, I don't know, talented when it comes to languages and everything like that. And everybody would like basically anything that needed to be done in a foreign language mathematically was for me. It's basically, oh, that's the language girl. She knows everything. And that was probably not the case even. Like, because I was well, I was a student of the same class with the same teachers and everything like that. So like technically I would be as good as any. But for some reason, this is something that everybody pointed out. Oh, that's the language girl. Oh well, she can speak any language. Go talk to her. Like it's like something like that.
Really cool. Huh. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about you. That's really interesting. I always assumed that, I don't know why, I just assumed in Russian that you sounded, well, Russian. That's interesting.
I do. I do. As in, after when I went there for the last time, after a couple of weeks, it came back to me. But the thing is, it's kind of embarrassing that it has to take weeks. Why would it take weeks? It has to like I have to go there and anytime I call my now it's even worse because anytime I call my family and we call together me and my partner, so I have to speak to him in English, and then I have to report back to my parents. It intensifies even worse because I mean there is all this interference and everything like that, and it's like my parents like my grandma did tell me once like, oh, you're now alien to us. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm trying my best. Honestly, I don't. I don't want to be this way.
Oh, very interesting. So now, obviously, you teach languages, and you've done it for a long, long, long time. You have a master's in teaching. Your master's was in
Yes.
teaching foreign languages. You're almost. Are you done your? No, you're not done your PhD, are you? You're almost done.
And no, it is now on hold, but I
Okay.
will finish it eventually. But eventually, it's a long long term,
So you're
basically.
you're partially through a PhD. Let's just say that. Um,
Hmm.
all you've really, basically, all you've done professionally is either interpreting, translating, or teaching language. For your whole professional life, I guess.
Yep.
Um, I guess how do you approach? I'll ask you a two-part question. I guess how do you
Hmm.
approach learning languages? Since you're learning French, for example,
Hmm.
you learned Spanish, although starting at a young age. You've learned Galician as an adult, I assume.
Hmm.
Like, how
Yep.
do you personally approach language learning? What's like, what do you do for yourself? And then when you teach language, how do you approach it? Is it the same? Is it different?
I guess it's a little bit similar, if not the same. But to me, the most important part of language learning is the system. Like I need to have a system. I need to have a point A, I need to have a point B. I need to approach language as a gradual exposure to the content, for example, but to the content, which I mean, for example, grammar or exercises and everything like that. I'm a big fan of boring stuff. I will do all the grammar drills and everything like that. Me personally, I like that. I know students, not all students do. That's why I try to do it the least possible. But if it was for me, we would do like grammar exercise and everything like that because I do think they help in a sense that they are a little bit like going to the gym. Like you train, you train, you train, you train, and you get better. And also to me, it is important to know where everything comes from because I guess Russian mentality is like that because the language is like that as well. Russian is a very curious language when it comes to word creation. Basically, you can create words that would, you can basically imagine a Lego and you can combine pieces any which way and you'll create new words and new concepts any time of the year. Like basically, you can just randomly create words and everybody will understand you perfectly. But what that means is you have to learn all the Legos in order to understand Russian. And it's not an easy task. So that's why you need to be aware where everything comes from at all times in order to understand this language in particular. Like, how can we dissect this word in order to understand what it means? And this is how I see the world as well. How can I dissect it in order to understand what it means? That's why for me it is very important to know where the word comes from, where the grammar rule comes from. I'm obsessed with history of the language and everything like that. I can tell 11 million anecdotes and fun stuff about like how the languages came to be. And actually, one of my students once told me because he basically wanted to play a joke on me. And he started on purpose to ask me questions about, oh, where does this come from? Oh, why is it like that? And I didn't even notice it. I thought it was just part of a lesson. It's just like a normal thing to me. And I had the answer for everything. He's like, well, I've checked you. You officially have the answer for everything. I was like, no, I'm not really. That's not. But it kind of like he basically wanted to test when will I say, oh, no, actually, I have no idea because when I do have no, when I obviously there are points where I don't know, but what I will do then, I will research or speculate, like most something like that, and apparently that's what I do. And also when I teach, to me. there are some key components. For example, the first one would be to know what kind of a learner is in front of me. And then can I adapt myself to mimic or to resemble or to be more like the person in front of me? Basically, how can I make you speak this language like you? Not like the book says, not like something like that. So to me, it is important to basically to make the learning process for the student almost like something that they don't really notice they're doing. And this doesn't mean the necessarily conversational approach. It doesn't necessarily because I do teach explicitly a lot, and I do explain a lot, and I do try to find a lot of exercises. I'm very visual. I try to find a lot of like visual examples and this kind of things, schemes, tables, everything like that. But I'm trying to make them look or feel like this is something that this person understands easily, something like that. I don't know if that makes any sense, to be honest, but well.
Yeah, I think so. So so I'm hearing a few things. So first of all, you do like to teach explicitly. So for example, some classes, like the most classic example I can think of for people that are language enthusiasts or experienced language learners even, you can probably understand what I say. When you go to an italki instructor, most of them, not all of them, but many of them, or Preply even, many of them, not all, but many are not structured. You show up and it's almost like, hey, let's just talk, or hey, what do you want to work on, or something like that. And that's not you, essentially. Like you do explicitly teach. I'm hearing that. But the way you explicitly teach will depend upon what kind of student you have in front of you. So
yeah.
Maybe one person is similar to you and they love all the grammar drills and the worksheets, and then you'll say, great, that's someone explicitly teach. But you might also have someone who doesn't respond well to that. So you'll still explicitly teach, but you may not explicitly teach in that sort of way. You'll do it in a way that matches more what they need. And I'm assuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming too that if someone showed up and they were perhaps wanting something that wasn't overly structured, for instance, like let's say they're treating you almost like a conversation practice partner on italki, you'd be like, all right,
yeah, definitely. And secretly, I will have a plan for them. All the people that I teach this way, they just think, well, we have a little chit chat, we like talk about our day and everything like that. When I enter this classroom, at the back of my head, I have some sort of a learning point that I want to teach them secretly, and I will intertwine it into the conversation. The person will have no idea, but I will still make sure that they follow some sort of a progress sheet in my head, because in the company I used to work at, we used to have documentation that was called the progress sheet, and I had to put, even for the conversation, that I think how I learned that, even if you did conversation, you had to put conversation and the topic. And you couldn't just talk about the person's day all the time. So I had to come up with different things every day, because otherwise the administration would see that I do nothing. And as a good, diligent, responsible person, I could not bear a thought of that. So I decided to I need to have a plan for even these cases. I always have a plan. All of my students have a plan that they follow, have a program. I get very personally upset where I always blame it on me, not on the student, because there's no such thing as an unteachable person. There's such thing as not working method, to me. Like basically, if the person is not learning, you're using the wrong method. It's not because they are at fault anyhow.
I think that's partially that's an interesting conversation to have, because I think it's partial. In my experience, I'd say that's partially true. I would also say, in my experience, sometimes you could be doing everything right and they're quote unquote stuck, but it's not necessarily because of the method. It could be, I mean, here's a number of factors I've seen. One, it could be something on the student's part where they're not really doing that much. They're not spending much time outside of whatever class you have on learning. Could be that. It could be that they are actually spending time on learning, but they're not in the mental place. They're not mentally in a place where they feel like, oh, I really have to learn this.
Yeah.
Where some students, they have this almost like they're extra motivated for some reason. Maybe they actually need to be because they're moving to a country or something like that. So it could be that. And it also could be, I've worked with some people that for some reason, um, they get stuck, quote unquote stuck, for like a 6 month window or like a 1 year window or a long time. Like it's reasonably long. And then suddenly they just get unstuck. Suddenly it gets figured out. And I don't actually know why. There's a good example of this is it's an example of kids, but maybe it's similar to adults too. It's similar. It reminds me of this. Often, so my mom teaches in elementary school. She's taught there for
Hmm.
almost 25 years, and she's taught kindergarten to grade 2 for her entire career.
Hmm.
And the school where she teaches, they get a lot of kids that come that don't speak English. They move from another country and they're brand new to Canada. So they don't speak English when they come to school. And many of them, they don't say a word in English for like 8 months or a year or like they literally come to class every day and they don't speak a word, not even one. And then one day, Tuesday morning, they show up and they're just speaking English. Like it's like one day they wake up and the brain's like, oh, I got it now. And they just
Yeah.
open their mouth and all the English comes out. And they just
That's
magically, almost quote unquote, magically speak it. So I'm sure those are very different processes, but the similarity I see is
hmm
it looks like for that 8 month window or whatever it is that the child is not making any progress because literally they don't say one word and they look at you with the deer in the headlights look every time you talk to them, and they're like, oh my god, this kid's not learning anything, and then suddenly just all the English comes
yeah.
out.
No, I've had the cases like that as well. And I guess it's the question of patience and like everybody yet again, I think we don't necessarily are contradicting each other right now because I think what we're talking about, probably not everybody will learn quickly. Probably not everybody will learn right away. Probably it will take like it's the question of time. Everybody is capable of learning in their own time and space. But the thing is, it's your job as a teacher to find a way to accelerate it as much as you can. At least there is no point nothing bad comes out of trying. Like if you try every day, if you even if you feel like this person is stuck and everything like that, my approach is then what can I do better? Not what do they need to do better? How can even if well you're speaking about like for example the mental state and everything like that due to like latest events that everybody knows of, I have a lot of people who come from Russia, from Ukraine, from Belarus, who I teach, and obviously, well, things happen in the world, unfortunately, and obviously during the beginning of these trying times, so to speak, people would come to class and they were not able to perform anyhow because I mean there are many different things on your mind that's not that. But even then, I told them, okay, how about you just use this class to vent and you tell me everything you feel and you tell in English to the best of your capacity. I'm not going to correct you, it doesn't really matter right now. As long as you do a little bit, you are golden. You have already progressed greatly. That's enough for me. And then I found that that can be really helpful. Even basically, the teacher can help. I'm convinced, even in if the situation is tough for the person, you just need to be empathetic enough, and you like, well, right now you have a lot on your mind. Kids, for example, not kids, teenagers, they have a lot on their mind because they here in Spain they have exams all the time, and I'm not sure if the same in Canada, but probably it is. They're super stressed, and then the parents send them off to English, to Spanish, to Russian. They don't want to be there really, but well, here we are. And once you start treating them as like, okay, well, this is your rest time. We're doing fun things. This is something that you can rest. Learning languages has, well, I guess bottom line, if you don't treat learning languages as a chore, then you will learn it quicker. Like, hey, it's no longer a chore for you. We're having fun here. I'm no longer the teacher. I'm whatever you want me to be, a showman, an entertainer. It's like I love it like that.
Are there certain types of how do I say this? Are there certain types of classes or students that you feel like you're better at teaching, and certain types that maybe you struggle more? Like myself, like I'll share myself. Like I um probably the type of student that one of the types of students that are not the hardest for me to teach, but it's the one that comes the least natural to me, are probably the ones that come most natural to you, if I had to guess, but we'll find out in a second. Are ones that love to have highly structured, for example, PowerPoint presentations, Canva presentations, where it's almost like a university lecture style class, where it's like, okay, we're learning this today. Let me walk you through how this works. Dun 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 dun. Here's some examples. Dun 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 dun. Bob, can you read this role? Bob and Sarah, let's do the role play together. Bob, could you read person A? Sarah, could you read person B? Okay, let's now break down what's going on. So this here is the predicate, subject, and what does that mean? Well, that means this. So that means situation number one is, and it's a highly structure is not the right word. It's just the word that's coming to mind now, but it's a highly structured way of teaching. And again, it's not the right word. I can't quite think of what the right word would be, but maybe, yeah, it's okay. You guys know what I mean, I hope. But that's probably the type of student that I teach the least, that I have to spend the most time preparing for. That's probably what it is. I need to spend the most time preparing for. I have to mentally prepare and go, okay, this is who I'm teaching. Off we go. And that's probably the one I struggle the most with personally. I don't know. How about you? Like, who do you find the easiest?
The exact opposite. That's literally what you're describing is my best case scenario. I really like people who, basically, my best students, for me personally, the easiest and everything like that, and the ones that I enjoy the most are high-paced, high quality, high quantity, sorry, of content, like ride or die kind of people. The people who come to you and say, listen, I will do whatever it takes, but I'm learning this language. So people who trust me to guide them as well. This is something that I've discovered about myself. I really need the person in front of me to trust the process, because I do kind of know better, because that's my profession, I guess. As in, not to sound arrogant, like, oh, well, I'm better than everyone or something like that. It's mostly coming from me as a client. When I go to a service, I expect them to know better, and I trust them completely. For example, when I go to the hairdressers, if the person asks me, oh, what do you like? I was like, well, you know my face type, you know my hair type, just do your job. I just have no idea, honestly. It's like I'm not. And for me, the people who come for me with any sort of specific uh challenges, I really like that too. Like, for example, teach me English for songwriting because I want to write songs in English. Well, let's do that. Teach me English for dentistry. As like, I have no idea, obviously, myself. I have to learn first in order to teach them, and I have to teach them to be resourceful and to find out about their own profession. I learn a lot in this language, in these classes as well, fun enough. But what I like the least, I guess, with no disrespect to anyone, to be honest, is just we personally don't click with this type of personalities, and that's pretty much about it. Are the people who are probably, fun enough, more, I don't know how to explain that, but kind of people who want to learn a certain set of, to quote unquote, useless phrases and vocabulary. And whether it's useful or useless is their own criteria that they have decided somehow. I struggle with that because it's like, I get it. I understand where you're coming from, and I would love to do that for you, but most likely it's not going to work because of the background work that hasn't been done. At least for me, because I need to know where everything comes from. And that's how my brain works. So I can't really understand how not to do that. Just because that's my brain and I can't have no other, basically.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, that's
we're
the
off.
case.
I think that's what it is. I think that's we've gone full circle, because you
Yeah.
said that near the beginning. So that's where I'm probably the opposite from you, in the sense that when I teach people that are like that, I have to consciously remind myself that I'm working with someone like that, and I have to go into the minute detail around a grammar point, for example. Here's precisely how it works. Here's precisely all the exceptions. Whereas my default if I'm working with someone, and most of the time this works because almost everyone I teach does not want to go into the minute detail of each grammar point with every exception and where does it come from, although there are exceptions. But almost nobody does. So my default tends to be just fine. But my default would almost be like, let's say you ask me a question about a grammar point, like the English, like maybe it's like, what's a good example? If we take like
conditionals, I don't know.
Sure, or it's like I'm trying to think of something that's like comes up all the time, even as a beginner. Like if someone said, let's take a Spanish as really stereotypical Spanish example of like soy and estoy or something like that, right?
I just thought the same
Right.
thing. I was like, he's going to say that.
That's like most stereotypical one, right? Like if someone's like, hey, like I heard, let's say someone asked me in class, they don't know ser and estar, or they're not familiar with verb conjugations. Like, hey, I heard there's like a soy and estoy, and they both kind of mean I am. Like, is that like what's going on there? My default answer would be like a really simple, like, oh, it's actually pretty simple. Like, estoy is just for like emotions. Soy is everything else. Like, what do you mean? Oh, like, estoy contento, I'm happy. Estoy triste, I'm sad. But everything else is soy. Soy canadiense, I'm Canadian. Soy grande, I'm big. Soy, yeah, you basically always just use soy. And like estoy is basically just emotions. And I would say there's more to it than that, but that's roughly it. And most people go, oh, okay. And that's the end of the conversation. It's like, okay. Whereas
no, my case. No,
like
no,
that would
not
be
my
my
case.
default way of answering something like that. Whereas I would rarely, unless I knew like who I'm working with. If I knew it's like, okay, no, this is, and I have a couple students like that I've taught for a number of years now. And with those students, I'm like, oh, no, no, no. If they're asking what soy and estoy, we now have a 50-minute conversation about ser, estar, the rules, exercises, worksheets. This we now have a whole thing to conquer, and talk about.
Yeah, I treat everybody. My default is the other one, and I balance out, for example, how many, like all four types of content, for example, listenings, readings, speaking, and grammar. I'm obsessively balancing them out. Obsessively. Like the student will get everything. They want it, they don't want it, they will get everything unless they don't respond to one of them. Then I'll throw one of them away. But by default, any student will get everything with me. Yes or yes. Because in my head, if I'm not giving them, it's a little bit like a personal, I guess, I don't know what, personal pride or something like that. I need them to know everything. I need them to be able to justify their response, so to speak, and I need them to be able to understand what they are saying at all times. But yet again, that's the mentality issue. That's how that's why, for example, it really works well if you ever have people whose first tongue is I dare say Slavic languages. I would bet money on the fact that they are going to need the same thing. Because we just think like that. We think like that because our languages are like that. Because in order for you to understand good morning, you have to know like little bits and pieces that go into them.
Yeah, I think my default, and even when I love to teach in this way too, and I like to learn in this, well, I partially like to learn in this way, but I definitely like to teach in this way. It's fun for me. I definitely like it. And I'd have to think if I learned this way or not. I'm not sure, but I definitely like to teach this way, where you teach something and I've taught something in a relatively simplistic way, and they go, oh, that's all it is? And I go, yeah, basically. And they go, okay. And then they have a piece of the pie in terms of how to say something. And they're going to operate with that piece of the pie as if that's the whole pie. It's not the whole pie. They got a slice. They think they got the whole thing. And they're going to operate with it with that one slice. And then inevitably, at some point, they're going to bump into something where they go, whoa, 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 hang on, hang on. That doesn't fit what I thought was right. And their brain goes, oh, hang on a sec. And you go, oh, yeah, that's a very good point. There's actually a little more to the pie than you thought. And we go, okay,
Yeah.
so let's talk about what's more to the pie? And we go, okay, well, there's also this we have to now keep in mind. And they go, oh, interesting. And now they have, a much more a fuller version of that pie. So, like a good analogy is a good example, rather not analogy. A good example of something like this would be and maybe like when I was learning subjunctive and when I learned the French subjunctive, that's probably that's an example I can relate to the most. Like, oh my God, that really happened to me, in the sense where I knew there was something about the subjunctive. I didn't know it's called the subjunctive. I didn't know that's what it's called, but I knew there's some part of French grammar that I wasn't fully aware what's going on, because I would hear it and I understood the sentences, but I was like, there's something funky going on there. They're saying some things that I don't really know why they're saying it. And I was like, well, that's okay. I'm just going to say it. Like, okay, I know that this means I have to do my homework. That was the first thing I learned to say. Il faut que je fasse mes devoirs, right? Faut que j'y aille. Another one, I have to go. And I was like, okay, I'm hearing some stuff here that I don't fully get. And I somewhat understood it. And I spoke somewhat correctly with the French subjunctive. Okay. And then later on, like probably a good year later, maybe more, I was formally taught the subjunctive, and I was like, oh, that's the thing. Oh,
Yeah.
that's the thing. And I never had the full pie. I wasn't even using the full subjunctive. I just used it in some very common ways, and I would somewhat use it correctly. And then when I learned someone taught it to me directly, and that kind of made the pie a much fuller pie. And I was like, I see I get what's going on now. And so when I teach, my default, it's almost like painting a picture in a sense, where you're painting with the language, where yeah, it's much more like painting a picture. And you might color this part of the picture first, and then you kind of might bounce to this, and you might bounce to this part of the picture. But then I know that, okay, we've colored this and this. We need to color in between them to connect it. We can't color in this section now, because that's going to get really messy to color this part. We've colored here. Oh, well, we got to connect them. So now I have to teach in a way that connects those two. Once you're in the middle, it's like, then it's very, I've never actually tried to express this out loud. So I'm trying to figure out the way to say it.
It makes total sense, actually. And I think that mine is quite the opposite. And it's quite interesting how they're both similar but different. In a sense, like if we use the same analogy, I want the picture to have the background. Like we color the background. In class, we color the background. Then you go investigate. And then it's when you draw a little bird or something like that. You add to your everything you may be exposed to at your level with covered in class. You just have to remember and recognize it. Oh, wow, that is the thing that she taught me the other day. And funny enough, the effect of recognition, especially when people who've moved to Spain and they now are learning little by little, they're learning Spanish and everything like that. They more often than not, they find themselves in the situation where the grammar point arises in the conversation. They're like, oh, wow, that's this. I know this. That's how I do it. And this reinforces it.
It's almost like, oh, that's the thing I learned in class. Yeah. Which by the way, also, that's why I'm hesitating a little bit. I'm thinking about how I learn, because I don't always learn in the sense of I hear something, then I learn it. Sometimes it happens, but I do very frequently learn something and then hear it and go, oh, that's the thing. That's the thing that my teacher said, or oh, that's the thing that I watched that video about. Oh, that happens too. So after this, I'm definitely going to think about how I learn as a learner. But I know when I teach, it's my default way. My favorite thing about teaching is like, let me know what you think about this. Actually, I find that most language instructors I've come across, the majority, what ends up happening is they develop their way of teaching, and they have a single way of teaching, and it works very, very well. They've learned one methodology, whether it's who knows what methodology it is. They've learned a specific methodology. They can go a little bit outside those boundaries to an extent. And that's kind of how they teach. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with how they teach, but it's one sort of way to teach. The thing that I'm the most happy with, because I've taught, oh God, I've probably taught 5,000 people. Like, I don't know how many thousands of people I've taught. I don't even know the number, but especially through the Duolingo classes and stuff, like And then I would have, oh God, I've just taught so much. And then if you take non-language teaching, all I've done since the age of, well, as an adult is some form of teaching in
Yeah,
some, anyway,
same here.
even as a kid, like volunteering in school, regardless, it's a conversation for another day. But one thing that I'm personally very happy that I'm able to do as a teacher, that I think sets me apart personally, is that I truly can teach quite well in very different teaching methodology. So if someone wants to learn through like like a content, like one of my favorite ones as an intermediate student is content and language integrated learning and using that as a teaching method. I love doing that. Like a more of a TPRS style class, love teaching that way. More of a traditional style with like grammar exercise, things like that. I don't, and it's not it's not naturally how I'll first think to teach, but I've taught that way many, many times. Whether it's teaching more of a, like there's a few different, very different ways that they're not similar at all, ways of teaching that I'm very, very comfortable teaching in. I forget why I brought that up. There's something we're talking. It was relevant.
Well, I guess we're similar in that for sure, because I've taught many different people throughout all my like many different kind of task that was given to me. So just teach me English for Spanish for la la la, and that's why I needed to be flexible. Yes, so yes, and also my personality is wherever I'm not comfortable, I'm gonna go there. That's my personality. Essentially, for example, I'm saying, well, I don't like this type of a student, everything like that. When I'm given the job, am I going to say no to this person because I'm not comfortable? No, I'm going to teach myself to do that. I don't care if it takes me effort, if it's not comfortable for me, I'm not afraid of that. I'll try to adapt. And I guess both of us, basically, I think we get along very well as well personally because we're constantly asking each other about these things. So we're constantly kind of like, oh, how can I do this one better? And then I listen to you and I can get your feedback since you're so different from me. I was like, oh, how did I not even think about that? Because that's so evident. And he knows how to do that. And I hope that's mutual.
Yeah,
So,
that like what was it, 2 weeks ago when you told me when I
yeah,
was asking you for advice about that one student I teach, and you're like, hey, did you think about what's it called again? The keys, what's it called?
Callan method,
Callan.
I
And then
think.
you brought that up, and I was like, oh. And so since you told me that, I didn't do that method, but I did. I've started to do something similar. Something it's
Mm-hmm.
basically inspired what I'm now doing with that student. Basically, even you've inspired it by talking to me about that, and I was like, and now that class is going way, not that it wasn't going smooth before, but she started to learn faster and she's more engaged and it's just going much, much better. And I was like, oh wow. Yeah, so it
And I
definitely
have the
is
exact
cool.
same case with you, the exact same case with you. Like, ever since you gave me the advice for the other student that I had, I started doing that. I know it works really well. And it's so
Is that the
enriching
one with
to,
like, I don't want to say any names, is that the one where we talked about like we talked about
yeah,
like the different,
25 things.
yeah,
Yeah,
that one. Yeah.
yeah. And it works brilliant. I would never honestly have come up with that by myself. I would not, it's beyond my capacity, I
Actually,
guess.
you want to share that because that's a really interesting that actually can work for a lot of language learners, I think,
Yep.
too. You want to like share that? That's a really cool yeah, maybe you want to share what you did?
Yeah, definitely. No, it is easy as it goes. Basically, I'm now using, also challenge myself to use ChatGPT for, if it's not sponsored, that just came up, but I use it in every single class of mine at least once just to see if I can adapt it anyhow, and it blended perfectly. So what you do is when you teach or try to learn a grammar point that you don't understand, what you can do is ask the thingy to give you 25 examples. You need to be very careful to, if you are the teacher, you need to be very careful and double check it because it's not always perfect, I must say. But you get, at least, you don't need to think about it yourself. You give 25 examples and you make the student read them and understand them and understand them and understand them. And by the end of it, by some kind of magic, the person can get it. I have no idea because I don't operate this way, but it does work. 100% it does.
Yeah, it is it's quite bizarre. So like it's basically, so to give some background info, there's some types of students that, well, I'm sure lots of instructors listening, if you are in language instructor, you can probably relate. And if you're a language learner, maybe you can relate too, where you hit this grammar point and you're like, you're just not, it's just not sticking in your head. You're trying to figure it out and it's just not sticking, right? And um, so then, oh, by the way, you don't have another class or something right now. I just saw the time.
In a bit, that will as well.
Sorry?
In a bit, in a bit.
How much time do you have?
Like give or take 15 minutes.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll be done. I have something then too, so we'll be done before then. So anyway, so if you're what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so if you're struggling with the grammar point, whether to teach one or to learn one, you know, like Catherine's saying, you have what you do is if you're the instructor, what you do is you take the grammar point and you write 25, or I've done less than 25, but 25 will definitely do it.
I like the 25 thing.
25 is like more than enough for sure, but 25 different simple example sentences that incorporate that exact grammar point. And then you have the student read them, you help, as Catherine said, you help them understand, and then they'll magically understand the grammar point.
They do.
And you as a learner, you can do the same thing. So like, let's just take a simple example. Let's take Spanish again. Like, let's say someone doesn't understand that in the present tense, things that end in O are for the, like, I play, I do, which boy, oh boy, that you'd think some people might think, really, they don't understand that? Oh my God, there's a lot of people that just, even the concept of conjugation is like, what? They don't understand. So what you do is you literally write, yo hablo español, colon, I speak Spanish. You highlight, maybe you highlight the O in red. Yo como una manzana. I'm eating an apple. You highlight the O in red. And you do like 25 of those, and then magically they'll be like, oh, so it's like a bunch of O's means, oh, I get it. And they'll like just magically it makes sense. Yeah. And you can do that. Yeah, God, it's just really, really helpful. Now that there's ChatGPT, you can have it write those sentences for you. Like, you literally tell ChatGPT, write me 25 sentences. You can even say, write me 25 simple sentences as if I were a 5-year-old learning the language, using the blah, blah, blah tense in blah, blah, blah language. And and then you can even ask it, explain to me as if I were 5 years old. That's a great one, by the way. Explain to me as if I was 5 years old. Explain to me as if I was 5 years old what's happening in this sentence grammatically. And it'll explain it to you. And you're like, oh.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. There are so many ways you can use it. And I think whoever is concerned about the artificial intelligence to basically to substitute teachers, I think that's quite the opposite. We now need to be aware of how can we use it to our advantage in our professional life, in our daily routines and everything like that, because that is the future indeed. And for example, for things like that, even if the question arises last moment, like for example, oh, teacher, I don't understand whatever, you haven't prepared the 25 sentences before, you had no idea the question is going to be there, which did happen to me once. And here you are, you just have the whole lesson planned. You're like, okay, we're pausing whatever we are doing, 25 sentences, off you go. And I don't know, I find it fascinating, to be honest.
Totally. Well, that's not the direction I thought this podcast would go, but here we are. I think we were planning on doing some Russian, I think, weren't we? I actually forgot right now, but
well, by all means, like, it is still, I've had a plan for you, so anytime.
I was like, yeah, I actually forgot. I got so wrapped up in our conversation. But anyway, everyone, thank you for listening. If you do want to take any Russian, Spanish, or English lessons with Catherine, you're more than welcome to reach out, and we can get that. I can get that set up. Any final parting thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, because I've had a lot of fun. And obviously, we always have this kind of energy of talking endlessly, and this is something that I really appreciate.
Before? I feel like we have. I know
we haven't.
But every time we talk, I feel like we get on these long like conversations, and I've always wondered. I was just wondering. I was like, I feel like we've done this before, and I was like, yeah, we've probably done this, but it wasn't recording.
Yeah, basically no, and I think it can be. I hope it is useful for the people listening, because and yet again, I want to say that I'm open to any sort of feedback or questions that the audience may have. I would be delighted to answer by whatever means necessary. And well, I hope everybody has had it.
We probably could have like our own podcast, like just the two of us. Like it's like there's so many things.
I
I
would
would love
love
to
that.
talk about witchcraft with you. I really want to talk. I want to talk about witchcraft with you one day.
I'm a
Which
witch also.
everyone like listening is like, what is Azren talking about?
Certified.
You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah, we know.
No, I'm officially almost graduated, double 2 times witch course listener. So yeah.
Or like
I
your rock music. Like that would be like I have so many. I have like I want to know your life story. I want to like sit like we need to sit down for like 3 hours one day and be like, tell me everything because you have a very interesting life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, anytime, honestly. I'm more than open to that.
Okay. Well, I gotta let. Well, you have a class and I also have a class, so
Yep.
I think we should both hop off. But
All
great.
right.
See you guys
Thank
later.
you very much. Bye
Yeah. See
bye.
you. Bye bye.